Welcome to In Real Time, where we as Heights Church are inviting you in for real conversations about leading people, organizations, and change in the new normal. We're hoping that our real discussions about our church's journey will help you as you reimagine and rebuild yours. Hello, Craig Sweeney here, and welcome to In Real Time, where we're having real conversations about leading people, organization, and change. I'm joined by two of my co-hosts today, and why don't you introduce yourselves before we get into our content today?
So I am Jen. I'm one of our pastors. I help with our office
you are.
and do ministry in the areas of restoration and prayer and women and good stuff like that.
So good,
Absolutely.
so good. Yes. And you?
I'm Tim. I oversee our online campus and one of the teaching pastors here on staff.
Nice,
Yep.
nice. And I just have to point out that
Oh, yes.
I now
Finally.
have my Apple
boy.
Ultra watch, so we are flexing together on that one. I don't
you
have to
Android
look at that
people,
and envy you
I
any
apologize.
Welcome.
Just
It's
plug
good.
your ears.
Welcome
It's
to the
good,
team.
It's good. What were you saying?
Oh, nothing.
Nothing? Okay.
Moving right along.
All right,
Let's
well,
get
whatever.
diving in
All
here.
right, so
Good
what
stuff.
are we talking about today? Really important content today. This was actually an ask from one of our listeners, so we want to dive into it. What is it? What are we talking about?
The pace of change.
Oh, boy.
Which is also really good at the beginning of the year, right?
Yes, it
We've
is.
just gone through a couple of awesome topics about how to formulate your year. So now how to implement any
Yeah.
changes.
That's right.
The pace is so important.
So good. And hopefully there are changes that are going to be made at our churches. There should be. I mean, there's things that
be.
we're learning and we're growing
Absolutely.
all the time. And so hopefully that means that we are going to be making changes, but not just for change's sake, but because they're needed. So a couple of things about this discussion. We are assuming that by the time we get to this, we know what the changes to be. I know a podcast or two ago, we said here at the beginning of the year, you need to ask yourself, what is it that I need to stop? What do I need to start? What do I need to have faith for? Well, all of those are going to bring about change. So we know what the change is. I'm assuming that for this conversation. So we're assuming that. The other thing is that change, the pace of change is a combination, the success of that change is a combination of the right idea, the right people, and the right timing. And if you get any one of those three things wrong, then you are not going to probably see success with your change. You need all of those, the right idea, the right people, the right timing. We're going to unpack that today. And of course, because of that, this requires humility.
Yeah, it's a
Which
big one.
we just all need to know that right up front, because you're going to be getting a lot of feedback, and we need to be listening intently. Not just nodding, but really listening, because it's going to be refined, your idea, your timing, and even by these people, the right people. So there's two different phases. What's phase number one?
Formation.
Formation.
Yep,
Okay.
let's dive
What
in.
do we, there's a couple things about this. There's two parts of formation.
First thing is that we want to get clarity about the change.
Yeah.
We've decided there is change, okay, but there
Yeah.
are some things that we need to know about that change that we're about to make. And so we want clarity. And so
Yeah.
it's the what, the why, the who, and the when.
Yeah, it's good.
How do you determine all that? Like, we got to get into that.
That's good. So recently we have made some changes, and so we were clear about the what. I could think specifically, a year ago, we brought in a third party who was leading us in a campaign because we needed to get our finances in order as a church as we were recovering from the pandemic. So we were getting things together, and fortunately we are there today. We're recovered, but it was because we went through a process of change. Well, part of that change was focus groups. And in that focus group, he asked a couple of really key questions, got feedback. So what were those questions?
They were along the lines of, what is your church doing well? What could your church be doing better? How can they shore things up?
Yeah.
Along those kind of lines.
And I think I know already that from our senior leaders, those are scary questions. Not just senior leaders, all staff. because we're all wondering, what are they going to say? I mean, we all want to hear the answer to what do you love about your church, okay?
Right.
Which there's a lot of things. I mean, they're part of your church, so it's not like they hate it, right?
Right.
So these are good people to ask.
Yes.
Okay, but what are those things you could be doing better? Well, we already have a culture of let's make it better.
Right.
Yeah.
So I want to know the answer to that. I don't just assume status quo. I want to make it better.
No.
So when we asked them that, we really wanted to know. So they had a couple of answers for us. They didn't have 10.
Yeah.
I think they had
No.
3.
Right.
Yeah, 3.
And it was weird. Over all of the groups, it
Yeah.
really was just
Very
these
consistent.
few.
Yeah, about 50
3.
to 60 people were asked in these
Yeah.
groups, right? So it was a good amount of people.
Yeah, about 10 in each group. So it's
Yeah.
good size for openness.
Yeah,
And,
so it was really good. Do you remember what some of those changes were?
well, I know the volume,
Volume.
of the music, which you clarified earlier. I'm not technologically proficient enough,
Yeah.
but it was a good point. So you should
Sure.
go ahead and share.
Yeah, yeah,
It wasn't
so-
actually the volume.
Yeah, yeah.
Our worship music.
They said, oh, the volume's too high. What it actually turned out to be was the mix of the overall music. There was
Yeah.
too much bass.
Right.
And we learned that through continuing to get feedback. Because the dB levels were actually, we were within range. We were fine there. It was the mix that we needed to just tweak. And when we tweaked it, it was overnight. People were like, thank you. That's awesome. We love this. And they could experience the worship in a much better way. Well, that's a win.
Right. Yeah.
And that made
Oh.
it better.
Yeah.
But here's the thing. I know that when we heard that feedback, I was a little nervous, truthfully, to go to Ryan, our worship pastor, and say, hey, we got this feedback. And I know, nobody wants to hear that somebody doesn't love what we're doing. So I get that. And I heard it that way too. I'm like, oh, man. But what I loved was Ryan and Josh, our production manager, they just said, okay, well, how do we do this? And we just sat and we started walking through the mix. We went through the process. It took us a little while. It took us a number of weeks of making changes. But everybody in humility said, let's make it better. And we got there. And guess what? Our church grew. That's great.
Yeah.
And some people who had stepped out because of the volume actually stepped back in. That's a win. Why would I
Yeah.
not want to know that?
Right. And that's an example of a change you
That's
can
a
just
change.
implement immediately.
Yeah, that
You
one
knew
was
right
quick.
away who
Right.
you needed to go talk to. Is this involving a few guys
Yep.
on the team? And you could make it happen quickly. So
Yeah.
the pace of that one was super fast.
Really fast. Not all of them are like that, though,
No.
right?
No.
Yeah. Yeah. No.
Most of them aren't.
They're not. Now, we also, talking about the what, we got to clarity quickly on another decision that we made when it came to child care. This one is ugly, though. So this is not a good story. This is an ugly story. And we actually
Whoops.
we've lived this out in the last year.
Yeah.
Ugly decision here. We didn't do it right. Failed to go through this process. Tell us about that.
And this story of when we decided to cut child care,
Yeah.
because of the decision we needed to make financially, not to
Yeah.
be able to do child care.
Yeah. Yeah.
You'll see as we go through these steps how we kind of missed the steps, right?
Yeah.
So we made that decision, and we just said, okay, let's go, and we implemented it.
Yep.
And we didn't have the right conversations with the right people and the right timing.
Yeah.
And we didn't, like you said before, so it was a good idea, right? But we didn't talk to the right people in the right time.
Right. We
And
didn't.
it was a disaster.
Yeah. They said, why are we doing
Yeah,
this?
because we didn't communicate the importance, why we needed to. And once we did, as we started to backtrack and having these separate conversations, they
Yeah.
understood and they
did.
got it. And it made sense to them.
Yeah.
But, so when you have life groups who are dependent on childcare, and next thing you
Yes.
know, they're just told, like in an email,
Yeah.
hey, we're no longer having childcare.
Right. Which is a sacrifice to them.
Yes.
Huge.
And they don't know why.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so
We had to
yeah,
explain
we got
the
that
why.
way wrong.
We did.
And
We did. That was
and it
pretty much
unfor-
your decision, right? That was your bad. That didn't have anything to do with
No,
that.
no, I just know the story best.
Oh,
so
okay. That's right. I might have.
this one was
I might
not
have
mine.
been a part of that.
This one was not mine.
Maybe.
But
We'll see.
But I did have to have a number of conversations with people as a pastor on
That were
staff.
upset about
Cleaning
it.
up my mess.
Yeah.
Okay, I got you. Thank you. Thank you.
That's okay.
Well, the why was financially we
Yep.
couldn't afford it, and that was we knew the why.
We knew
and
the
that
why.
was a huge deal.
We
no
assumed
longer
everybody
could-
else knew the why.
Yeah, but they had no idea.
They didn't.
And they didn't understand why you're doing this, why are you stopping that.
Yeah.
We had to explain, well, because it costs a lot of
Right.
money.
We
for
got
us
ahead of
to
ourselves.
Put this.
And that's
Yeah.
like, for instance, when we talk about the what, that's why the next one is the why. That's why that's so important.
Yes.
And that's why the next one says who.
Yeah.
Because we needed to have those conversations with those people.
That's right.
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 And when. We didn't even do a when. We just launched it.
That's right. That's right. So we need to be clear about the what. We need to be clear about why. We need to be clear about who is going to be impacted, who's actually going to bear the brunt, who's going to have to sacrifice. Well, I need to know that.
Right.
Because I need to go talk to them. And I need to be clear about when.
Yeah.
I need to be clear about when.
After you've already talked to
Yeah.
the people that
Yeah.
really were going to be impacted.
Yeah. So I want to move on to the next point here, but I do want to say not all decisions are quick. We implemented one decision, and I think we did this right, and we did it over time. We did it I should say it took us longer to make a decision than I wanted it to, but because we went through the process, my best idea went to the side, and then I learned, and I was able to then implement it correctly, and then we saw huge success. But the whole thing truthfully took 6 to 12 months. And I wanted to do it within about a month. So this was when we made the shift as a church from men's, women's marriage ministries, Sunday school type model to a life groups model. And so basically that means we had a men's ministry. You just gather all the men of the church, have a really big function, have a speaker, worship, and then you go home. Same thing for women, studies, and then you had a marriage ministry, kind of the same thing. You had Sunday school classes, these larger
Studies
groups.
going
And we
on,
said,
yes.
this is fine, but now for us as a church, we want to go to life groups, break this down to 10 people. And instead of these groups, these larger ones, we want to go to the smaller groups. Well, that's a major shift.
Yeah.
And there was a lot of things that we need to consider. We knew we needed to do it because we were losing community with a large group of people within our church, because our church had grown to the size that men's, women's marriage no longer satisfied the community need for us. We outgrew that model.
Right.
So we needed to get smaller. And because we went through that process of life groups, we had all the conversations correctly, and we waited to do it, implement it correctly. It took us probably about 4 to 6 months before we could actually make the shift, have the conversations. But when we did that, 1 year later, we had about 85% of our Sunday morning attendance in life groups, which was a huge win. Yes, we heard that right. 80% of our church in community.
Yep. They
And
were
we
in
were
a
only about
small group of
60%
people.
before that.
Yes.
Right.
That's why we made
That
the
was
change.
a win.
And we haven't looked back.
No.
We still today run somewhere around the 90 percentile. There's times now that we actually have more in groups than we actually have here on the weekends.
Correct.
Yeah.
And that's a win.
It is a win.
It's a win.
But we went through that process.
Yeah, we went through that
Yeah.
process. So
what,
that
the
was
why, the
longer,
who.
though. That took longer. Okay, so
two.
we got to get clarity about the change.
Yep.
What's the second part of formation when we're talking about the pace of change?
That's testing your clarity with the right people.
Yeah.
So once you get the clarity and you identified the what, the why, the who, the when, then you kind of get the right people in the room.
Yeah.
Right people, that's key. Get the right people in the room. And as you like to say, we started to poke it, we started to prod it, we started to, you're bouncing these ideas, you're refining it.
Yeah.
And so you got your clarity, and now you're bouncing those ideas with the right people.
Yeah, it's good.
You're refining it and pulling apart the layers.
That's good. I think it's important to recognize that as leaders, we have questions that we're asking and that we're answering. But the questions I'm asking and answering aren't necessarily the questions our people or even our lay leaders or even staff are asking. It's this process, the poking, the prodding, that I get to learn what questions they're asking. Really important that I learn that, and you just can't get that information any other way. I, as a senior leader, think through these decisions ad nauseum. It's ridiculous how much time I spend on them. But there's never a time when I've thought the entire thing through that when I go to a group of people, I don't hear something new, or I don't hear a nuance that I hadn't considered, or that I thought, oh, that won't be important to them. But it turns out it was really important to them. So I learned something.
Yeah.
And I'm always going to be able to then communicate it better to the next group.
Right.
That's a win.
Yeah.
Why would I not want to know that?
And when your team knows these steps, when you're testing your clarity with the right people, which is for us our management team, right?
Yeah, very often it is.
You're getting new ideas, fresh ideas. Like we didn't do this when we came to the childcare decision.
Yeah, true.
Because I guarantee you, somebody in those meetings would have said, "Well, who do we got to communicate this to next?
Yeah.
How do we, all these questions." And so that's why this poking and prodding is important, because at that point our ideas are wet cement. We're still trying to formulate those into something that's healthy and good and wise and best for our people. And so the good part is that when we're having conversations, say in our management team at this level, creates ownership with all of those people. So then when we are out talking to others, it's our decision as much as it's your decision, and as much as it's your decision. It's our decision.
Yeah.
And it's usually better. Like I said before, you've said this, like my best idea is not always the best idea. Very rarely. I have to, maybe a good idea, but it gets polished into
It's true, right, Jen? Because we've heard some of his best ideas.
Oh, man.
But it gets polished.
God,
My
over
good
the-
idea
Wow.
gets polished into a best idea because
good.
everybody's adding and evaluating and poking
true.
and prodding it.
I only said that because you would have said it to me. If I had
Absolutely.
said
You
it
beat me
first.
to the punch, man.
Well, tell me about this. What happens if I, as a senior leader, don't go through this process? I just walk out of my office and tell you guys all, hey, by the way, we're doing this, and I don't want to tell you why. I don't need to tell you why. You work for me. Just do it. Now, I realize that that's not actually how it happens, but it kind of close.
Yeah.
I've lived in those situations. I've been on those staffs.
Yeah.
People did not want to ask the why question.
Well, what happens is there's not clarity. So you come out and just say, this is what we're doing without any, like, then I have to leave that meeting, go back to my office and go, no one even asked about how that impacts my ministry.
Yeah.
And it's not really a selfish place to be, because my ministry,
That's
you know,
true.
for so many years was student ministries. So that means parents, students, families.
Yep.
It could impact our activities and camps and how we operate on a Sunday morning and how we operate in the midweek. There's all these questions that every ministry has, or all these things. And so if you dictate without going through this process, I'm left with like, well, man, does he realize that this, and this is going to be are going to be impacted? And if you did know, then we may have packaged it, made better decisions. So it just feels it's isolating. You don't feel valued. Like, does does a leader even care about the impact on my ministry?
Ooh,
and remember, those ministries, those people are supposedly, they're called to those ministries. So it's personal.
It's personal.
Very personal.
Yeah, and I want it to be personal.
Right.
I don't want you to be in a silo, but I want it to be personal.
You want me to be passionate.
That's right. That's what brings the passion.
That's right.
That's good.
And it brings value as you bounce the idea off of us, and we get to contribute and pour in our thoughts. Also, if you're a visionary, which you are, you're high visionary, you tell that to somebody
Keeps my
like
head in
me,
the clouds all the time.
who's an operator. But if you tell
You're an
somebody like me,
operator.
who's an operator processor,
You get stuff done.
I have a lot of questions immediately.
Yeah.
Like, okay, so do you know how much that's actually going to take to implement this, and how much work it's going to take, and how long that might take in order to do it right and well?
Yeah, and
Because
the
I wasn't
answer to
part of
that
the
question is
conversation.
usually no, I do not. And I
Yeah,
need to know
so-
that. What
yeah.
am I actually asking?
Yeah.
Doesn't mean we don't do it. It just means we all get to know what we're up against.
Yeah. If you're willing to do that and able to take that step of humility, it really is. We all know that.
It endears the team. It creates ownership.
Yeah.
Yep.
It really does.
Yeah, and I just want to say to senior leaders, I think it's really crucial that we go through this process, because it builds trust with your team. And if you don't feel like you have a team you can do this with, then what you know now is that you have trust building to do with your team.
Yeah.
And that's a really important work to do.
It is.
And I would just say that that would be the change. You need to do
That's priority.
immediately.
Yes.
Yeah.
You need to build trust with your team.
Put all this on pause,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah,
Start
you really
building
do, because
trust.
that's the most important thing in front of you right now. You just learned something that you don't have the team you need to be successful, because what I know is the success of what God wants to do here at Heights Church is way bigger than what I bring to the table.
Yeah. It's that
It
kingdom.
just is.
It's that kingdom thing.
It is.
It's a kingdom thing.
Yeah.
So
His work.
it's really crucial for that. I cannot emphasize that enough for senior leaders, and I get it. I understand it can be a little bit insecure. There's, to be told, hey, maybe that's not the best formation of that idea. I get that. I've gone through all those emotions. It's not emotional like that for me anymore because we have trust.
Right.
Yeah.
But early on when we were building that trust, yeah, I get it. But that's how you get there. So I'm just going to say, get there.
Yeah.
So when we're talking about the pace of change, this idea of formation is so critical. We're talking about the right idea, the right people, and the right timing. So this is how that change is formed. This is what we're talking about here at phase 1.
Correct.
I tell you what, I think we need to make this a 2-parter, you guys.
Okay.
All right.
So let's pause right here. We're going to pick up next time, and I'll tell you what it's going to be. It's phase 2, which is implementation and communication of the change.
Nice.
Again, this overall pace of change. And I'm just going to leave us with this caveat. We need to know that communication can happen at the speed.
You mean change?
I'm sorry, change
Right.
can happen at the speed of going through this process.
Yeah.
Okay? If you haven't gone through this process, then you're not ready to implement change.
Right.
But when you've gone through this process, however long that takes, now you're ready to make the change.
Right.
And now
So-
you're going to be successful.
And you're going to be
And that can be
successful in
different
that
for different people. So
Right.
there isn't really a stand. Here's the number.
change. No, there is no
Yeah.
number.
You
There's no
You
number.
go through the steps, however long
Yeah.
it takes,
That's right.
and now you're set.
That's
for
right.
change.
You're going to do life groups? Well, that's going to take you 6 to 12 months. You're going to change the volume? Well, you can do that this week.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Awesome.
but a lot of good things to think about. So that's where we're at today. And I just want to challenge us today as we're parting that change can happen. And let's make sure it does, because God's church has a lot at stake with the impact we're making. And I want us to be able to make the needed changes, but let's focus on the pace of change. So for this week, thank you for being with us as we've had a real conversation about leading people, organization, and change. And we will see you next time. And if you enjoyed this content, please hit like and subscribe and the bell notification, and you will not miss one episode. We will see you next time.